Hi, I'm Diane Macedo. Today on ABC News Live, the reaction coming in as former President Donald Trump launches his third presidential campaign. What it means amid several investigations and as some Republicans blame the former president for the disappointing midterms. 2 people are dead after a missile landed in the NATO country of Poland. Now world leaders are trying to figure out who fired it. This as Russia launches a massive assault across Ukraine, targeting civilians and critical infrastructure. And liftoff, the most powerful rocket in the world, Artemis I, is finally headed back to the moon. We'll talk to an astronaut about why it's a major breakthrough for space exploration. We begin with former President Trump officially announcing he's running for president again. It comes as Trump faces backlash from Republicans after a poor performance from his favorite candidates in the midterms. Chief Washington correspondent Jonathan Karl has more on what this announcement means for the Republican Party.
Donald Trump has spent 2 years attacking American elections, but now he's hoping voters will return him to power.
In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
Surrounded by loyalists and members of his Mar-a-Lago club in Palm Beach, Florida, Trump largely stuck to the script written by his advisors, boasting about his record as president, attacking Joe Biden, and for the most part, staying clear of the election lies voters soundly rejected in the midterm elections.
America's comeback starts right now.
Some fellow Republicans have blamed Trump for the party's failure to win big in the midterms. Trump acknowledged Republicans should have done better, but he said that was because Americans don't yet realize how bad things are under Joe Biden.
The citizens of our country have not yet realized the full extent and gravity of the pain our nation is going through, and the total effect of the suffering is just starting to take hold.
Trump's candidacy is clouded by multiple criminal investigations and lawsuits, from the investigation into the classified documents he took from the White House to a New York criminal investigation into his company. Just hours before he announced his campaign, Trump's longtime chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, took the stand, describing how the company schemed to avoid paying taxes. Like many other Republicans, New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu greeted Trump's announcement with a shrug.
Whatever announcements may or may not be happening tonight, frankly, nobody's going to care.
But not long after Trump started speaking, President Biden posted a video portraying him as a threat to America.
We will treat those people from January 6th fairly, and if it requires pardons, we will give them pardons.
Our thanks to John Karl for that. And ABC's political director Rick Klein joins me live now, along with ABC's Jay O'Brien on Capitol Hill for more. Rick, what do you make of the timing of this announcement by Trump? Why do this now?
I don't know anyone who is thinking around politics who thinks it's a good idea on the timing. I think the best argument you can make is it gets ahead of the rest of the field. I also think, frankly, that he boxed himself in by teasing this announcement when he thought that the Republicans were going to have a good midterm night. He thought he'd be taking a victory lap when it turned out to be the opposite. And now, pending the Georgia runoff, this could easily backfire. And you're seeing many Republicans, including many people that were very loyal and worked for him for a long time, saying this is ill-advised, this is ill-timed, and they are not being shy in publicizing their breaks with the former president, even though he has valued loyalty above all.
Now, Rick, ABC's 538 analysis shows Trump is already favored to win the 2024 Republican presidential primary. And they say the polls and history are on his side. How do you see this playing out?
Well, I don't think that there's any real analog in history for what we're seeing, certainly not in modern times, of a former president trying to come back and get his job back. The most recent famous example on this would be Teddy Roosevelt, who had to start his own party 100 years ago. That predates modern polling. So I'm not sold on him as the prohibitive front runner. Clearly, there are others in the race or potentially in the race who will be looking to that. We've seen many conservative groups come out just in the last couple of days and say that Governor DeSantis is the front runner. They're putting out private polling to suggest that, trying to urge Trump away from it. So he'll be a formidable candidate, but he's not going to be the only one. And it's very hard to run this wire to wire, particularly given the baggage around legal investigations and the memories of last January 6th that Trump carries with him.
Now, Jay, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, while all this is going on, he's facing his own battle in his bid for the speakership. What's the latest there?
Yeah, well, McCarthy won the GOP nomination for Speaker last night, but there were 31 of his colleagues, his House Republican colleagues, who voted against him. That was his first hurdle. He's got to win the vote in January when the new Congress gavels into session. That's got to be 2018 votes that he's got to get, or excuse me, 218 votes that he's got to get. That 218, the slimmer the GOP majority is, the harder it might be for McCarthy to reach that threshold, because he's got to wrangle the far-right members of his conference. And there are some in that conference, Representative Matt Gaetz, for example, who have said they will not vote for McCarthy under any circumstances. Gaetz claims he's got 4 other GOP lawmakers that also won't vote for McCarthy, which in a slim GOP majority could really thwart McCarthy's efforts to become Speaker. He hasn't said who those lawmakers are. And there are other far-right lawmakers like Marjorie Taylor Greene who said they do support McCarthy, and not backing McCarthy would be akin to, as Greene has put it, letting Democrats pick their Speaker of the House.
Jay, the Senate is set to hold a key test vote on legislation to protect marriage equality at the federal level. What are you watching for there?
Yeah, it's a procedural vote. It happens later this afternoon around 3:15. The Democrats need 60 votes to pass this legislation. They need 10 Republicans to join them. It is expected they will get those votes. It is expected this legislation will be bipartisan. This is the bill that came out of the overturning of Roe v. Wade and fears that other rights given in Supreme Court decisions, like the right to same-sex marriage, would be overturned by future Supreme Court decisions. So this legislation goes through the House, it goes to the Senate. It is expected to pass that procedural vote today. It tees it up for potential eventual passage. Then the question becomes, when do lawmakers put it to a vote officially, and can they get it done before they all go home for Thanksgiving at the end of the week?
Rick, how crucial is timing here, given that the government is likely going to change come January? I mean, it is going to change. We still don't know who will control the House, but changes are coming. So what does that mean for the next few weeks?
There's a lot of work that has to get done in what's known as the lame duck session of Congress. The biggest ticket item may be to try to move something around the debt ceiling. People know this clash is coming, and if the Republicans take over control of the House, then they're going to be in a position to maybe extract some concessions for the basic task of paying the bills that the United States has already racked up. But that's going to be tough. It's going to be hard to happen in both the House and the Senate. They're going to have to get a lot of work done to make it work. And also, don't forget the January 6th committee. If Republicans control the House, the January 6th committee almost certainly goes away. I would expect that we'd hear more from that committee in the closing weeks of Congress and the closing weeks of their existence, knowing that there will be a clock on that committee's expiration as soon as we know that Republicans will take over the majority.
All right, Jay O'Brien, Rick Klein, thank you both. Meanwhile, overseas, Poland's president is calling a deadly missile strike there an unfortunate accident. 2 people were killed after the missile landed close to the Ukrainian border. A Russian attack on Poland would be a significant escalation in the war and could force NATO to intervene. But the NATO Secretary General says that it's likely the missile was a Ukrainian air defense missile. Foreign correspondent Tom Sufi-Burridge is at the scene. Hi, Tom.
Yeah, Diane, officials in all NATO member countries now trying to dial down the rhetoric. President Biden doing it overnight, pointing towards the possibility that this was a Ukrainian surface-to-air missile. The investigation, which is ongoing up the road from here, we've seen the Polish military coming and going down the road in quite heavy numbers. It speaks of the sensitivity around the investigation, but everything is pointing towards the possibility that this was a Ukrainian surface-to-air missile trying to hit one of those Russian missiles flying over western Ukraine close to the border yesterday and potentially going astray. But we were in Kiev yesterday afternoon. We heard the missile start falling. It was an unprecedented wave of attacks, even for Russia's standards in this war. More than 90 missiles, the Ukrainians saying they struck about 80 of them down, but some of them hitting their targets. And again, more and more people in Ukraine are losing power. Last night, 7 million households in Ukraine were without power. But this is, I think, now a moment of de-escalation, really. It could have been much worse. There were a bit of finger-pointing, I think, late last night when this news was breaking towards Russia. That doesn't seem to be the case. But there are important questions about air defense in this border region between Ukraine and NATO member countries like Poland and the sort of general security picture here. Those issues will have to be addressed. Diane?
All right, Tom Sufi Burridge in Poland, thank you. And President Biden is on his way back to the U.S. after holding an emergency meeting on that deadly missile strike in Poland. The president and other world leaders were at the G20 summit in Bali when the news broke. Senior White House correspondent Mary Bruce has the latest there. Hi, Mary.
The president and allied leaders this morning are united as they try to get a full picture of what happened here and determine what comes next. Overnight, the president coming out of that emergency meeting with G7 and NATO leaders, we heard him say that he thinks it is unlikely that this missile was fired from Russia. Biden and other leaders are now clearly trying to dial down what could have been a potentially explosive situation. Biden, of course, has repeatedly said since the very start of this war that the U.S. will defend every inch of NATO territory. But he also wants to avoid any escalation, because Biden has been blunt that any direct conflict between NATO and Russia would lead to World War III. Now, as for what comes next year, Biden is now making the long trip back here to the White House from Bali. But the fact that Poland is saying that this seems like an unfortunate accident, well, that certainly lowers the temperature, Diane.
All right, Mary Bruce at the White House, thank you. And let's bring in senior Pentagon reporter Louis Martinez for more on this. Louis, what was the Pentagon's initial response when this strike happened, and how has that changed over the last few hours?
Diane, I can tell you that yesterday afternoon when this story broke, this building was busy. Officials trying to figure out exactly what was going on. We had a regularly scheduled Pentagon press briefing with Brigadier General Patrick Ryder. He began that briefing by starting off saying, we know that something has happened. We are aware of these press reports of a missile strike inside of Poland, and we're trying to figure out what it was. For the next half hour, that General Ryder took tons of questions from reporters, but he would not budge from that information. What we're aware now is that later on, they were looking at all possibilities, whether this was a missile fired by Russia, whether this was possibly an air defense missile fired by the Ukrainians, which has now turned out to be the case. But they needed to get that information. And the way they got that information, more than likely, was by the eventual arrival of Polish military personnel, as you saw in Tom Sufi Burridge's report. They were the ones who are essentially leading the investigation into exactly where this missile may have come from precisely. But the real indication, as you saw in Tom's report, was from President Biden, who in Bali said that it was unlikely that the trajectory of that missile indicated that it had been fired from inside Russia. I think once that information was put out there by President Biden, then you could see the tamping down of the concerns that this may lead to a broader crisis, as have been concerns about the invoking of Article 5 with NATO. But today, Pentagon officials now saying that they are also in agreement with what we're hearing from Poland and from NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg, that this was more than likely a Ukrainian air defense missile.
Now, Louis, according to a U.S. official, CIA Director Bill Burns traveled to Kyiv to meet with Ukrainian President Zelensky today after meeting with his Russian counterpart in Turkey. So what more do we know about that meeting?
Sure. So the meeting actually took place. He was in town yesterday in Kyiv because he had just met on Monday in Turkey with his Russian counterpart, the head of Russian intelligence. And the message that Burns projected on Monday was essentially, do not use nuclear weapons inside of Ukraine. And that is by itself a very strong comment and very extraordinary in itself. So after that meeting on Monday, Burns went to Kyiv on Tuesday to meet personally with Ukrainian officials to brief them on his meeting and to stress essentially that, yes, I had communicated that message to my counterpart. Now, the interesting thing was that he was in Kyiv as those barrages of missiles were coming inbound into the city itself, and so he had to take cover inside the U.S. Embassy, but he was okay. But the meeting there was more to just to consult with Ukrainian counterparts.
Now, Louis, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin delivered remarks at the Pentagon today and said, quote, we will continue to work closely with our ally Poland and others to gather more information, and we'll continue to consult closely with our NATO allies and our valued partners. So what are you watching for as this investigation plays out?
Well, I think what they want to try to ascertain is they have actually concrete evidence that this was a Ukrainian air defense missile. Right now, they're using the term more than likely, correct? So what they're trying to do is advance that to full certainty. You can expect that the Poles will try to figure out the serial numbers of that was aboard that missile and try to figure out if, in fact, it came from the Ukrainian inventory.
All right, Louis Martinez, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Yeah.
Coming up, it is National Epilepsy Awareness Month. When we come back, we'll talk to Disney star Cameron Boyce's parents who lost their son to a seizure. How they're raising awareness now about epilepsy education after the break. Welcome back. November is National Epilepsy Awareness Month, a brain disorder that affects 3.4 million Americans. It's the condition that claimed the life of Disney star Cameron Boyce, who died at just 20 years old after having a seizure in his sleep. Now Cameron's parents, Libby and Victor Boyce, are honoring their son's memory with the Cameron Boyce Foundation, which advocates for epilepsy awareness and research funding. And Libby and Victor Boyce join me now with more on that. Libby, Victor, I want to start by just asking you, it's been 3 years since Cameron's passing. How are you both doing?
Well, we get that question a lot, and, we take it day by day. Every day is a struggle for us because, we miss our son so desperately, but we try to use our time in a positive way and just keep the focus on the foundation and what Cameron would want us to do.
Now, Victor, many people don't know what epilepsy is, really. I've witnessed someone having a seizure before, and it can be scary. So what do you want people to know about this condition and how to support people with it?
Well, you need to support the person. You need to stay calm. If you witness somebody having a seizure, you need to stay calm and stay with them. If they're having a seizure for longer than 5 minutes, you might want to call 911. But basically, you stay calm. And you keep them comfortable, you keep them away from things that might hurt them, and you just wait because typically it doesn't last very long, and then you can assess the situation afterwards.
Libby, Cameron's official cause of death was sudden, unexpected death in epilepsy. You say you had never heard of that until after he died. Do you wish you had known about it, and what do you want other people, either with this condition or loved ones of this condition, someone with this condition, to know about that?
Yeah, I think people have to be armed with information. So the medical community needs to do their part in informing them as best as possible, because people need tools. They need to be their own advocate. The medical community is not going to do it for them. So it's the responsibility of the doctors to really explain what it means, that it is a very serious disease, that it can be fatal if you don't watch yourself, take your medicine, get sleep, stay hydrated, all of those things. So it's just really, really important that people get information, especially when they're newly diagnosed, because they know nothing. So the information about SUDEP would have been helpful to know that actually he could die from epilepsy.
Victor, Cameron had so many young fans. How do you want your son to be remembered?
Just as he is. His fan base to this day are our biggest supporters. Cameron was much more than an actor. He was an advocate. He was a person that would give you the shirt off his back. And people remember him for his kindness and his charity much more so than being on TV. If you ever met him, he was a lasting impression on your life. And I've been told that countless times. So just remember him as he was and keep his legacy alive and be kind to people and help us out, donate, and help us figure out this epilepsy crisis, because it's truly a crisis.
Victor and Libby Boyce, I'm so sorry for your loss, and we thank you so much for your time today.
We appreciate you for having us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Coming up, the mission to the moon finally underway. What the Artemis I liftoff means for the future of space exploration. Welcome back. The Artemis I rocket is finally in flight. After months of delays, the most powerful rocket in the world will now spend 26 days traveling to the moon. Transportation correspondent Gio Benitez is at Kennedy Space Center with the latest.
3, 2, 1. Right after 3 delays since August, a major breakthrough in space exploration.
We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
The most powerful rocket in the world, the Space Launch System, propelling the Orion capsule toward the moon with 8.8 million pounds of thrust. Orion already feeding back stunning images of the Earth from space. It'll spend 26 days getting to the moon, orbiting it, then returning to Earth, splashing down off the coast of San Diego on December 11th. Launch director Charlie Blackwell-Thompson, the first female launch director, taking in the moment.
On behalf of all the men and women across our great nation who have worked to bring this hardware together to make this day possible, and for the Artemis generation, this is for you.
Many believe that Artemis generation can change the world.
This is the first step, this test mission, to put the first woman, the first person of color on the moon, on the next missions. And so, I mean, the world will never be the same.
And while there is so much research to do on the moon, the goal is to use the moon eventually as a layover as humans go farther and farther into the universe. Diane.
Gio Benitez, thank you. And for more on this historic launch, let's bring in former NASA astronaut Mike Massimino for more on this. Mike, thanks for being here. Put this into perspective for us. How big of a deal is this, and what does this mean for the future of space exploration?
Well, Diana, it's a pretty big rocket and a pretty big step that was taken this morning, sending the Orion spacecraft to the moon. The rocket performed perfectly. It looks like, I'm sure we'll hear more about it, but it seems like everything went really well. And now the Orion spacecraft, which will eventually bring people to the moon, is on its way. And this is the first step. It's just Artemis I, but it's the first step in going back to the moon to stay this time, not just for visits, but to stay.
What happens next in this journey for Artemis I?
Well, it's going to get to the moon probably early next week, come as close as 60 miles, and then enter a large orbit around the moon, and then come back to Earth. The plan is to have it splash down, re-enter, check out the heat shield, and re-enter the Earth on December 11th. So along the way, it's going to be taking lots of data about radiation protection and vibration, lots of information on how well Orion is suited to bring people to the moon.
Now, NASA says the Artemis expedition could lead to the first crewed space trip to Mars. How far do you think we are from that?
Mars is a long way away, but this is not only the first step to getting us settled on the moon, but getting us closer to sending people to Mars for that exploration. And that, of course, is also very exciting. I hope we just got to keep going with the plan that we have, I think, and we should be able to get people on Mars, I would think, in the next 10 years or so. If everything goes according to plan, we should be able to have people permanently on the moon in a few years, and then hopefully use that as a launching pad to send the first crewed mission to Mars. So this was a big step, not only to get us back to the moon, this time to stay, but also to explore further to Mars and hopefully beyond someday.
And when you say this time to stay, what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, so 50 years ago, we went for visits. It was like, trips that they would go for a couple of days, collect rocks, do some studies, and then came back. But there was never, and the intention was never to settle there with a permanent presence on the moon. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary next month in December. Will be the 50th anniversary of Apollo 17, the final mission of the Apollo series. We haven't had people on the moon in 50 years. But instead of just going back for visits, I mean, the first trip, Artemis 3, will just be a visit. But the plan here is to go and set up the infrastructure that we can have a permanent presence on the moon.
All right, we're going to leave our toothbrush there. Mike Massimino, we appreciate it as always. Thank you.
That's it. Exactly right. Leave your toothbrush there. Thanks,
Getting
Diane.
comfy on the moon. Love it.
That's it. That's it.
And thank you at home for joining us. Mike, thanks again. I'm Diane Macedo. Do stay with us as ABC News Live continues with more news, context, and analysis.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.